Warhammer for Noobs. Space Marine 2 launches in just a few days for everyone, already available if you bought the deluxe edition. If you're new to the universe, let's give a basic rundown of the overall story. The Warhammer universe is extensive in terms of story and lore, so today we'll cover some of the main general points. If you have any tips of your own about the story and the universe, be sure to leave them in the comments. We first need to start by addressing the setting and sort of multiverses in Warhammer. So on one side you have Warhammer 40k, or just 40k, which is a sci-fi setting that takes place up to 40,000 years in the future. On the other hand, you have Warhammer Fantasy, which is completely different from 40k as it's not sci-fi but deals with magics, monsters, and fantasy-like settings. Think of it just like that, a multiverse. There may be some connections between the two, but canonically they are different. Let's dive more in depth with Warhammer 40k. Our story here is centered around the humans and their groups spread across the galaxy called the Imperium of Man. The Imperium has a god emperor, and although the humans want peace and to stomp out forces of evil, the Imperium is full of war and corruption. The main goal though is to keep humanity alive, fight off endless hordes of enemies. In this universe, the Space Marines are the Emperor's most trusted forces. Supermarine humans designed for battle. They wield many different weapons, guns, blades, and jump packs and can cause some pretty serious damage. Space Marines have different chapters among them, with the most notable being the Ultramarines. There are many different enemy factions you may come across. If you played Space Marines 1, you've fought the Orcs. Think of them like space hooligans who just love to fight. The Eldar, space elves who are nearly extinct. Tyranids, space bugs you may have seen in Space Marine 2 trailers that eat everything. Necrons, undead robots from ancient times. There are many more found throughout the lore in some various games, but these are the main ones you'll hear about. So you may be wondering, why is there so much fighting and war all the time? A big cause of this problem is something called the Warp, another dimension where chaos gods reside and other forces of chaos like chaos demons could emerge from. These chaos gods can corrupt pretty much anything, even Space Marines, turning them to their side. The story of Warhammer is pretty much of an endless war. Although there could be some hope and small victories at times, the universe is constantly at war. There's no actual true peace. I mean, just look at the Space Marine game's opening title. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. You then have Warhammer Fantasy. Pretty much the same overall themes of war, destruction, and chaos, but a few differences. This one is set in a fantasy setting with different kingdoms and races. Instead of the Imperium from the 40k group of things, the human group in the fantasy setting is called the Empire, and you guessed it, they're always under attack. In the fantasy setting, you may find elves, who are divided into different groups like high elves, dark elves, and wood elves. Think of your classic fantasy elves with their own kingdoms and agendas. Dwarfs, a proud race of warriors and craftsmen who live in underground holds. Orcs and goblins, pretty similar to their 40k counterparts. You have undead vampires and skeletal armies, and chaos reigns further once more. Chaos gods are the same, and they corrupt pretty much everything, sending armies of demons and warriors to destroy worlds. Every race fights for survival from chaos using magics and power. Near the end, something called the End Times took place, an apocalyptic event where the world was destroyed. This led into a new era called the Age of Sigmar, which is sort of blended fantasy and 40k elements. From the Warhammer wiki and some other sources, let's take a look at the general overview of each timeline. I tried to make this image to make it easier to understand. We first begin in the Dark Age, M15 to M25, so 15,000 to 25,000 years. Humanity begins exploring space and colonizing worlds. If you play Destiny, think of it like Destiny's golden age. Technology flourishes, AI develops, and humans are at their peak. This golden age, as they all seem to do, doesn't last, leading to the Age of Strife. Warp storms begin and block travel from other human colonies. Many of the worlds that belonged to humans either fell into chaos or were completely destroyed. This then moves us to the rise of the Emperor and the Great Crusade. The Emperor of Mankind unifies Earth and creates the Primarchs, 20 genetically engineered superhuman sons. The Great Crusade begins to reunite humanity and establish the Imperium of Man. This is when Space Marine legions were created led by those Primarchs, and they conquer countless worlds. Soon after that would be the Horus Heresy though. One of these Primarchs, one of these sons of the Emperor, turns on them when he's corrupted by chaos. Horus eventually reaches Earth and the Emperor and he throw down in a duel. The Emperor manages to kill Horus but is injured and placed in a golden throne, a system that barely keeps him alive, but he becomes the God Emperor of the Imperium. After this, times are tough. The Imperium is held together but fight endless wars against orcs, Tyranids, and Necrons. The Inquisition is formed and Space Marines continue their fight. The 13th Black Crusade begins when a character called Abaddon, a Chaos leader, launches his mission to destroy the Imperium. He succeeds in destroying a fortress world and a giant warp rift opens that divides the galaxy in two. And lastly, one of the Primarchs, a leader of the Ultramarines, is resurrected. His name is Guilliman and he leads what's called the Indominus Crusade, to stabilize the Imperium and fight back against forces of chaos. So in the end, still fighting and the situation is pretty dire. Now we move on to the fantasy timeline, which starts with the Age of Myth. The world is created, and the Old Ones, an ancient godlike race, shape the planet, creating many races including the elves and the dwarves. This is a peaceful time, kind of like the golden age of the other timeline, but like that one, it doesn't last. The coming of chaos begins afterwards. The great gateways of the Old Ones collapse, allowing the forces of chaos to enter. Dark magic pours into the world, corrupts everything, and the Old Ones disappear or are killed. A brutal war then breaks out between the High Elves and the Dwarfs that lasts for centuries. The rise of Sigmar and the founding of the Empire. Sigmar is a human warrior who unites tribes of man and defeats the orcs in a great battle. Sigmar was crowned the first emperor, founding the Empire of Man, which becomes the most powerful human nation. The Skaven rise soon afterwards, a race of rat men. They live in tunnels beneath cities and they wait for their moment to rise and conquer. In fantasy, you also have those vampires. In the Vampire Wars era, they attempt to take over the Empire multiple times. The Great War of Chaos. Chaos invades the old world in full force. The Empire, High Elves, and Dwarves unite to fight the Chaos invasion, barely managing to survive. A character called Magnus becomes the Emperor after his heroic efforts to save the Empire during this war. And lastly brings us to the end times. Chaos invades once again, but this time in far greater numbers. The world is completely torn apart by this war. Chaos, Skaven, and undead forces destroy many of the key cities and regions. The old world is pretty much destroyed, and Chaos claims victory. This then leads into an era called the Age of Sigmar, which as mentioned sort of blends fantasy and 40k elements. So there you have it, a basic summary of the Warhammer universe and its multiple timelines. If you'd like to see some more Warhammer videos just like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I thank you very much for watching and I'll catch you all in the next video.